Have you ever stood outside a crumbling prison and wondered what horrors were sealed behind those rusting gates? Prisons are built to contain the worst of humanity, but when they're abandoned, they become monuments to the darkness they once caged. They're not just empty buildings, they're silent witnesses. They echo with footsteps that never left, cries that were never heard, punishments that went too far. Today on Mystery Junky, we're unlocking the gates of 3 of the world's most chilling abandoned prisons. We'll travel from America's Gothic nightmare to Estonia's fortress of fear, and then deep into the haunting ruins of a prison so cruel, it was nicknamed the Alcatraz of the South. So turn off the lights, hit that like button, and subscribe if you dare. And stay until the end, because some walls never truly let you leave. In the heart of Philadelphia stands Eastern State Penitentiary, a towering fortress that once promised to reform criminals through total isolation. When its iron gates first swung open in 1829, it was unlike any prison the world had ever seen. No chains, no overcrowded cells. Instead, it was a cathedral of silence. Prisoners were hooded when moved, forbidden to speak, locked alone for 23 hours a day in cold stone cells with only a Bible and their thoughts for company. The Quakers behind this experiment believed solitude would force criminals to reflect, repent, be reborn, but instead it broke them. Charles Dickens toured the prison in 1842 and called the system cruel and wrong, warning that it turned men into hollow-eyed ghosts. The silence that was meant to save their souls instead devoured their sanity. Eastern State housed some of the most notorious criminals in American history, including Al Capone, who spent time here in a surprisingly lavish cell. While most inmates shivered on straw bedding, Capone had a Persian rug, a cabinet radio, and fine furniture, proof that money could bend even the strictest rules. By the early 20th century, the isolation experiment crumbled under riots, overcrowding, and a growing belief that this brand of redemption was torture in disguise. The prison finally closed in 1971, but its walls never forgot what they held. Today, Eastern State is partly preserved as a museum, but some visitors come not for the history, but for the ghosts. Echoes of footsteps in empty cell blocks, whispers in the halls, shadows that slip behind crumbling doors. It's become one of America's most haunted places, a reminder that true horror doesn't always need chainsaws and monsters. Sometimes, all it takes is silence and 4 walls. Thousands of miles away, where the icy Baltic winds whip the shores of Tallinn, Estonia, another fortress tells a story drenched in political terror. Patarei Fortress began as a 19th century coastal defense, a massive stone structure built to guard against naval attacks. But by the 1920s, it had found a new, far darker purpose. It became a prison, and during the Soviet occupation of Estonia, it turned into a nightmare for anyone who dared to speak out against Stalin's regime. Patarei was notorious for its brutal treatment of political prisoners. Teachers, writers, priests, farmers. Entire families were dragged here on accusations of disloyalty, sometimes for nothing more than whispering a forbidden joke. Cells overflowed during Stalin's purges. Prisoners were starved, tortured, forced into freezing isolation. Some were dragged into the basement and shot without trial. To this day, visitors find desperate messages scratched into the walls. Final words from men and women who knew they'd never see the sun again. When Estonia regained independence in 1991, Patarei stumbled on for a few more years until finally shutting down in 2004. But its horrors weren't buried. They linger in the damp, rotting corridors. Tours today lead brave visitors through rusting iron gates, decaying bunk beds, and execution chambers that still smell of cold stone and damp air. Some claim the air grows heavy in certain cells, that you feel watched, as if the past refuses to rest. Standing inside Patarei is to stand in a place where hope was extinguished, where walls did more than confine. They erased identities, families, futures. It's a fortress that reminds us just how far power can twist the idea of justice into something monstrous. Now, let's cross the ocean again, deep into the rugged hills of Boise, Idaho, where stone towers and weather-beaten guard towers mark the ruins of the Old Idaho Penitentiary. Built in 1870, this prison earned a reputation that made even the toughest criminals tremble. Nicknamed the Alcatraz of the West, the Old Idaho Penitentiary was famous for its overcrowding, violence, and executions. Its original sandstone buildings were carved by the very inmates it would later entomb. Early prisoners broke rocks under the scorching sun by day and shivered in unheated cells by night. Some of its most infamous residents included Harry Orchard, the hitman who assassinated Idaho's former governor, and Lyda Southard, a black widow who poisoned multiple husbands for their life insurance. The prison's gallows claimed many lives. In total, 10 men were legally executed here. The final hanging took place in 1957. One of the most feared parts of the Old Idaho Penitentiary was solitary confinement, a pitch-black cell known simply as Siberia. Prisoners sent here were locked in total darkness, often naked, for days or weeks. Stories of madness and suicide swirl around Siberia like ghosts in the fog. Riots and escapes were common. In 1971 and again in 1973, major uprisings set fire to parts of the prison. Overcrowding and the violent conditions forced Idaho to finally abandon the site. Today, the ruins stand as a museum, but not all visitors come to read the plaques. Paranormal investigators have caught voices whispering their names. Cold spots appear without warning. Shadows flicker through the cell blocks where no light should fall. Some say the spirits of the angry, forgotten inmates are still locked inside. Trapped in the prison they helped build stone by stone. What is it about abandoned prisons that keeps us staring through broken windows and rusting bars? Maybe it's the horror of knowing that inside these walls, ordinary men and women endured nightmares we can barely imagine. Maybe it's the curiosity, wondering if we could have survived their punishments, their isolation, their despair. Eastern State Penitentiary shows us what happens when silence becomes its own form of cruelty. Patarei Prison reminds us how easily fear can turn stone walls into weapons of oppression. And the Old Idaho Penitentiary warns that even the wildest frontiers can't hide the darkness of human nature. All three stand empty now, but they're not truly silent. Every cracked wall, rusted gate, and peeling paint chip hold a story. A secret confession, a desperate prayer, a final scream muffled by iron bars. We leave these prisons to crumble because they make us uncomfortable. They force us to confront what we're capable of doing to each other when we think no one is watching. But maybe that's why they should stand. To remind us that punishment is not always justice, that isolation is not always redemption, and that forgetting the past only invites it to repeat. Some say these ruins should be torn down. Let the ghosts rest. Let the nightmares fade. But if we erase the past, how do we learn from it? Next time you see the ruins of an abandoned prison, ask yourself, what voices still whisper behind those walls? Would you dare stand inside alone, in the dead of night, with only the echoes of the condemned for company? Drop your answer in the comments. Would you visit Eastern State, Patarei, or Idaho's Haunted Fortress? Before you go, hit that like button, subscribe to Mystery Junky, and share this video with someone brave enough to walk through those cell blocks with you. Because these walls may be cracked and broken, but their stories will never die, and neither will the shadows that still wander their empty halls.